Steps to a Better World. A concise set of algorithms to organize and govern the mind's information traffic, guided by a purpose-driven life plan and related actions to execute it. From global issues and pertinent ramifications to a specific action plan, quantified goals and related controls to manage one's life. It should come as no surprise that current generations are facing greater challenges than preceding ones. From geopolitical and environmental issues to socio-economic crises and racial tensions, all negatively affect the times we are living. Daily, the media presents us discouraging news ignited by pressing topics such as materialism, violence, abuse, poverty, conflicts, war, deprived well-being, corruption, climate change and destruction of natural resources. This polarization and brutal competition to cross the lines that divide the social classes, violently tears apart the fabric of society. Complex issues and inner workings such as these are reflected in many aspects of our lives. With the population and density increments projected for our cities, the future points to greater disorder and disruption levels. We need to go back to the basics and begin paying attention to the aspects of our lives that really matter. We need to devote time to look within us, redirect our actions and focus on generating content for our lives via sharing events with family and friends, helping those that need a hand, educate our children accordingly and be creative while designing improved sustainable systems for the future, in an effort to pave the way for those that will succeed us. Providing resolution to global issues is no small undertaking, but the key to a better world is in working together at all levels of society. Consider the following modest, but tangible proposal. If we subdivide the various organisms that coexist and interact in the planet and place these in descending order, we can see a top-down cascaded effect from nature's needs down to the individual. The orange area represents the vast cloud of norms, values, needs and requirements the collective system of organisms reflect. And the yellow cloud depicts the bottom-up contribution each of these subsystems gives back to the interfacing elements of the environment. What's required of every organism for the world to heal, is for it to operate from a restored self-esteem state and furnish a collaborative environment that's transparent and honest. Although organizations such as the UN contribute sustainable development goals to aid the situation, the implementation of solutions at the global scale seems unnoticeable. The reversed, inside-out, bottom-up approach, provides a more tangible, efficient and faster solution. Each of us have our own domain of influence. If as individuals we all function and perform at our best and our behavioral responses are conducive of self-awareness, self-discipline and treating ourselves, families and neighbors empathetically and respectfully, then the global self-esteem condition is certainly a possibility. If we reincorporate a value system into ourselves that's characterized by justice, humbleness, courage, modesty, humility, compassion, hope, charity and integrity, then crime, racism and violence become obsolete. We need to implement a transfer function that permeates and smoothest out the boundaries between classes and uplifts the well-being and economy at every level by cultivating a self-image operating mode that begins at the personal level. This functionality crosses each subsystem interface and ripples through every level of society, culminating at the satisfaction of nature's needs. Let us consider the individual level a bit more. Philosophers of the ancient world struggled with human nature-related questions. From details on whether we are inherently good or bad, rational or irrational, to inquiries on how we create our conscious reality, think, reason and plan. Since those days, the mind-body relationship has been of interest and observations led the early psychologists to understand that the brain was the most powerful organ of the human body and the executive control center of the nervous system. For the sake of the discussion that follows, picture the boundary of our brain submerged in a behind-the-scenes field of information. This is the input we receive from our surrounding environment. Now, think of the mind as the software that operates the brain. Then, replies back to the environment can be characterized by responses of reactive, adaptive or contextual nature, depending on our inner state. 7 basic features: environmental stimuli or input, memory, operating system, output responses, feedback loop, uncontrollable factors and controllable factors, comprise the pictorial model. There are dial levels of these factors that we can adjust to compile the perfect recipe and generate resulting information processing signatures that alternate between the psyche circuitry loops which consequently will produce the more desirable contextual responses we need back out into the environment. It is the consistent production of these controlled responses that will put us at advantage and give us the edge we need to excel in the disordered world we mentioned earlier. But before we begin setting these factor parameters, let us consider the current state of our lives. Our development directly impacts our behavior and to a significant extent, has determined our current state. Our life's infinite number of connections and pertinent outcomes has complemented, but also interfered with the level of stability and fulfillment of all areas of our lives. Imagine each area of your life is a bucket of water and the water level relative to the bucket height. How much you value the given life aspect, collectively across all buckets defines your overarching satisfaction state. We may be doing good at work, but other areas we highly value may not be properly attended. Further arranging the buckets in descending order according to your core values or what's really important to you, depicts a better idea of the areas of your life that are in disarray with your priorities and perhaps, provides an indication of why you might feel discontent or not fully alive. That is, an aspect of your life that ranks high in your value set showing a low water level, for example, would most certainly be impacting your happiness. The levels of satisfaction, and dissatisfaction for that matter, proportionally influence the responses we return back to the environment and in many ways, permeate our circles of influence, which ripples through all the subsystems discussed earlier. These responses have the potential of positively or negatively impacting society's collective pool of needs and desires, and it's imperative that we closely control them. Our efforts and psyche set points should be focused on keeping these buckets properly prioritized and filled, which in turn will habilitate us to inject a positive dose of morality, civility and empathy back out into the world around us as our destiny evolves and we progress in our journey. We all have some sort of value system or moral code that we've gathered over time as a result of our ancestors' traditions, and that's affected by the customs of the country or region we live in as well as by the generation and culture of the individuals we interact with. It is this very same ideology or standard that many times provides incompatibility and is the source of many of the problems and issues we are facing as we act on the aspects of life. Depending on our past trajectory, each of us tends to be more or less conservative. That is, due to our moral formation. Some of us have tendencies to be more liberal or common and rank the traditional values such as nobility, hard work, autonomy and sovereignty lower. The criteria we were raised to judge and sanction by guides our actions, the way we present ourselves to the community and pertinent conduct we display. These values steer our relationships and sexual preferences, work ethics and the methods we employ to achieve our objectives. We must have a good account of our unique beliefs, values, needs, desires, and natural talents, so that we can capitalize on these while pursuing our desired levels of goal prioritization and fulfillment. At the same time, we need to rectify and control these unique attributes, in order not to infringe each other's path. The final portion of our current state assessment is to identify and inventory the resources and means you currently have in your possession. This last step is crucial as we will need to leverage these very same resources to catapult us to our future state or entitlement. While creating your current state inventory, pay attention to your age relative to the potential longevity of your life, say 80 years on average. It is essential that we have a good account of how we are currently allocating our available time throughout the day, week, year, etc. and to understand if we are devoting time to the activities deemed necessary to move in the desired direction. Also, consider your current health state as well as your physical and mental abilities. Lastly, review your current financial and work status and compare these to your liabilities. Once you have a clear picture of this inventory, look back at the water level of each of your aspects of life buckets and ask yourself if the conversion of these assets to fulfill the gaps you deem necessary is realistic. The response to that question directly translates to the magnitude of the gap you must fill, in order to be successful based on aspirations. But before we generate the blueprint to close these gaps, there are several topics we must consider. As you would most probably agree, life is not always this simple. We are finally at a stage where we can synthesize the POS concept and redesign its operating set points to generate a change that shifts the special cause patterns being detected in our current behavior and return the output to a more contextual response. More specifically, we must see our mind's functionality against the array of noted issues and challenges to create an analog that allows us to understand how these cascade down to each of us. The model shall allow us to organize and direct our psyche to devise modulated responses that address these issues and permeate each of the aspects of life with resolutions that flow back upstream, contributing to the grand cosmic plan. These abstractions can be further pictured as a malleable governing system that detects input stimuli from our own mind as well as from the external environment, decomposes it and reconstructs it to a form that depicts the faculties of the most suitable set points from each of the factors to produce a desired timely response. As the input stimuli is sensed, our perception consults our memory bank substrates, bouncing it against the array of most efficient synaptic connections to identify the urgency, importance and significance the input signal carries relative to the revised conscious model or construct we've encoded. If our security or safety are not urgently pressed and we have good intelligence on the adequate mix of set points that need to be allocated to shape the response, then our POS handles the event accordingly. That is, by allowing the ego to open the floodgates, just like a transistor would. It biases the system in a positive fashion and allows the free flow of the superego in concert with the executive centers to craft and output a timely response onto a task through the adaptive or contextual pathways. The id, urge to join the effort, reaches into its limitless amount of long-term memory material and free to associate ideas, images, hunches and intuitions, contributes to the shaping of the response with the most hygienic and creative forms of thinking. This output signal, shaped as a key to perfectly fit a lock, clears relevant pins, allowing it to turn just in time. The process heavily depends on how rested we are and on how our metabolic system is able to sustain the energy demands. It works in perfect harmony when our gas tank is full. But, as our energy levels drop, our decisions stem from short-term needs as opposed to from the desirable long-term objectives we have, and consequently, impact the accuracy and precision of the behavioral response due to the distress we feel. In the latter scenario, the limbic system would have, to some extent, resist and overcome the free flow of the superego supported by intelligence, and the response would display our reactive nature. Like any other software, the LeanMe POS and previously described information flow require the right circuitry to operate. That is, our three-dimensional space, time and the facilities, utilities and equipment it contains. This platform allows us to sustain a state of flow, be organized, to prioritize, schedule tasks, act on them in a consistent manner and to apply defensive routines, when irregularities are detected. It allows us to act in a preventive rather than a reactive mode, in efforts to identify issues ahead. This is where the word lean comes into play. At its core, the lean philosophy is the proper application of resources, in just the right time, to produce a product with the least amount of waste. Our behaviors and actions are the product we as individuals produce. This software is superimposed on a lean infrastructure, and it's mainly concerned with the delivery of these very objectives. With that said, the space layout we navigate should be arranged to support our transactional processes and information flow, in a manner that the utilities, apparatuses, tools, machines and support systems we utilize are within proper and easy reach. These pieces of equipment must be precise, capable, reliable and easy to use to properly support our operation. We should design our circuitry in a manner that it is strategically located to minimize noise pollution and interruption as well as to maximize privacy, thus allowing us to move from point to point intuitively and with minimum resistance. We should ensure that the paths are easily rearrangeable, allowing us to create dynamic flows, if our routine sequence were to require changes. Resources such as consumables, food, gas, etc. should always be replenished and readily available. To allow for enhanced stability, we need to secure the right amounts, of the right ingredient, in the right place and at the right time. We must have visual signals such as to-do lists, reminders and alarms that advise us when there are supply failures or when the levels of these consumables or ingredients require replenishment. To further support the fulfillment of demands effectively, the platform should be developed to facilitate the identification of normal from abnormal. Our facilities, residence and workplace building for instance, should be designed to include locations and compartments for all tooling, paperwork or the bills we utilize to support our activities. These storage locations should have specific slots for each tool or item, allowing for their retrieval with easy, single-action motions. The physical distance and amount of time required to access these tools should be minimized. Time, the fourth dimension that defines the platform and that we consume when generating work, is our most precious resource. This administrative capacity and indispensable effort are central to the concept of avoiding degradation. Time is the driver behind the quality of our responses and the amount of energy we spend crafting these. When properly utilized, we reduce the work done by our facilities, utilities and tools and increase our overall productivity. It is the element that glues together and harmonizes our flows, sequences and resources. It establishes the standard rate or heartbeat that allows us to link all of our processes and makes these run in an orchestrated fashion. It is the principal ingredient controlling and synchronizing the work required from us and our replenishment systems as we consume, allowing us to produce exactly what's needed, in just the right quantities. It is the most elemental substance of the POS, when it comes to doing work based on the needs presented to us. So, with a smooth, flexible layout design, that's balanced, has a sense of pace and produces just the right amounts based on work demands, the POS is equipped to function with the fluidity and dynamics it is intended for. Let us now consider the procedural aspects or soft domains that this platform will articulate, allowing us the just-in-time opportunities to modulate our actions and responses. In the majority of the instances, the individual covets pleasures, fortune, power and is motivated by the ambition to possess more and more of these. We also tend to take the easiest route to conquer these forms of basic needs, and we respond with hostility and unfriendly behavior when our ways are obstructed. Selfishness, and the inborn impulse towards curiosity and ambition to reach the status of others are central to human nature and constantly driving mediocrity and the decay of the social fabric, given that our mental activity is naturally set to take the most favorable, least resistive route to conserve existence. The POS is geared towards developing intelligence that can deceit these natural tendencies via efforts directed towards identifying opportunities through each of the aspects of life to evade the natural resulting feelings of anger, resentment, envy and jealousy when we don't get our way, and divert our impulses and drives to harness the forces behind these emotions to produce constructive results. It is the relentlessness to autonomously negotiate and overcome these obstacles that destiny presents us with at times via our efforts, self-mastery and creativity that would bear fruits, promote progress, bring the greatest rewards to the spirit and ultimately, serve nature's needs. This should be the ultimate target of our mind and the energy and intensity arrangement our motivation allocates to the objective. It would be nearly impossible to discreetly place moral specifications and parameters around each and every single one of our actions, as modern life is too convoluted and sophisticated, but a possible solution could be a redefined moral code uploaded onto our consciousness. A moral code designed to pull away from the personality ethics and that instead, engages the character ethics viewpoint. In other words, a moral value system that allows us to acknowledge and gauge our everyday decisions relative to character values such as justice, humbleness, courage, modesty, humility, compassion, hope, charity and integrity. The revolutionary change and reform we need, starts with the redesign of that very same latitude nature allowed us. We need to gradually begin to reverse the cycle right from the root cause that first shifted nature's traditional trend and began moving us into our current trajectory. If we carefully consider our problem, we can see that what originally shifted was the new ability we were furnished in the resulting ways we devised to obtain, possess and retain the sources of energy that would secure us being at the apex of the power pyramid. In order to harness and properly channel our basic instinctual drive, our psyche parameters need to be reconfigured. The first order of business of the POS event handler is to tune into our spirit and purpose parameters and perceive nature's calling for us to transition from our current base value system to the noted reformed standard. A standard that moves away from laziness and making excuses, to one that instead makes use of these resistive tendencies and is motivated by the courage to acknowledge that we inherently possess the greed desire. A standard that reflects the ambition and a dominance need for the purposes of redirecting it with wisdom and intelligence to a conscientious course of action, which is to be sustained for the rest of our days in an integral fashion and with a high degree of fidelity. While working in conjunction with our memory manager, the handler shall install a copy of this moral analog in our consciousness, in efforts to have the model readily available for reflection during every moment of our wakeful state. With this setup in mind, the handler checks with the interrupt counterpart, and given there is no incoming environmental stimuli, the POS works as an open loop. In this configuration, the handler invokes the time and resource management module and the latter selects the next prioritized task in queue, while the former requests a set of mixed emotions characterized by anticipation, interest and optimism. The handler verifies that the initiative jumpstarts the motivation factor to adjust and force a behavior that embraces our unique calling to act upon the ambition and dominance urge, in efforts to shape the task at hand. There is perhaps no skill more fundamental in this matter than diverting the id's instinctual drives for immediate gratification and focusing these on generating productive action. The interaction between the emotions and personality parameters must be operated at a sweet spot, where the fears and anxious worries venting from the understanding that postponing the start of a task will make us inefficient and impact our gains, are routed to delay the gratification aspects of the id, coming from laziness and from receiving without putting in effort, and propel us into action. The id is basically turned against itself, aided by the accompanying negative emotions. This worrying, if allowed, has the ability of spinning the pus into an endless loop of concern, which will continue to feed our gains with negativity. The ability to divert the laziness mood to escalation towards functioning at potential and acting on a task is executed when the consciousness parameter is tuned to notice the worrying episode and relays the information to the thinking factor, so that the latter inquires if this path is any way favorable. This mindfulness and healthy skepticism would initially act as a physical brake. The idea is to then challenge the worrying event via contemplating a range of equally credible viewpoints to validate its reality and use the built momentum to trigger us into productive action. The imagination and the creative process assist with the comparison, which in turn uplifts and cheers the emotions, bringing the process full circle. We want to focus this energy along with our innate talents and skills to lead projects that increase the aggregate efficiency of our systems, via reducing the power conversions at every step of the value chains. This will enable huge productivity increase, reduce ecological footprint and lower cost to near zero marginal cost. Need to get involved in projects that connect us all, bypassing vertically integrated or centralized structures and enabling the laterally scaled ones. In doing so, the psyche will be geared to enter this zone again and again. A sort of just-in-time response where your thoughts, emotions and actions are an integral dynamic flow. All your cylinders are perfectly firing, and you go about the different tasks that build into your projects and ultimately, at the fulfillment of nature's needs. Feeling that you are contributing to the reversal of the momentum and trend we find ourselves in will ultimately satisfy that outdated feeling of greed that shifted us into this territory at the onset, but it would be done with intentions that satisfy overall well-being ambitions instead. Capitalizing on the correct psyche set points to invert our primal greed instincts and channel this energy through our natural talents to focus it on projects that benefits humanity and in the end nature, would allow us to experience the true measure of happiness and the state we must seek every second of our wakefulness. Our aim must always target the management of these natural tendencies and weaknesses and profiting from the strengths that above described recipe allows us to convert these to. But life is not always simple, neither we can expect our psyche to perform at a consistent, near-perfect performance while producing every response. For instance, when a load in the form of internal resistance such as procrastination, laziness, excuses, obedience to base desires or external disturbances from the environment such as encounters with toxic people, noise pollution, group pull, generation influence or destiny obstruction is perceived by the interrupt module, it represents an error to the POS functionality. There is a difference or departure of the actual responses from the desired, relative to our revised standard. The interrupt resorts to the handler to appraise the situation and plan the resolution for the concerns. The first bullet in the handler's agenda is to readjust the thinking parameter to identify, sort and reprioritize our current action plan. The thinking process initial instruction is to assess the type of deviation that's occurring and identify if the source is internal or external. The thinking parameter must be adjusted to properly discern if the departure from standard is caused by ego allowance of the id's desires to oppose the free flow of the superego standard code of ethics or by political order. If the variation is confirmed being self-originated, the handler must verify the emotions parameter as the deviation is most certainly rooted on fear. If the claim is, for instance, that it is not fair for you to have to perform a given task, that is too hard or that there isn't enough time available, you are most likely masking a fear of failure, ridicule, not being accepted or even reaching success. On the flip side of the coin, returning the parameters to equilibrium will take for us to look inward and have an honest conversation with ourselves. The handler must advocate the consciousness and thinking parameters and have these collaborate to understand why the ego has diminished its arousal level and is consequently impacting our contextual level of performance. The thinking process shall then initiate a line of questions that brings light into what's causing the ego to allow the id's procrastinating tendencies to take away the superego's flow characterized by the previously installed analog. The thinking process must ask why we fear motion in the direction of accomplishing the tasks we are procrastinating about. Ask if that fear is really anchored on the reality of what we believe of ourselves. The handler shall assess the long-term memory and retrieve our previous wins and pertinent supporting evidence. The more that can be assessed the better, as by sheer force, the positivity this brings will allow the conquering of the fear and in doing so, the internal resistance that's impeding our desired state of flow. The POS must remain in that subroutine loop until we feel that ambition, unique calling or reason for our existence surfacing. Such level of arousal will guarantee optimum performance and efficiency, while focusing our contextual responses to the task at hand. The objective is to maintain the momentum by reminding ourselves that the task we have on the works is tiny compared to some of the giant ones we've accomplished in the past. Consult your schedule, reprioritize accordingly and do the easy, low-hanging fruit tasks first, in order to gain momentum to tackle the larger, more complex ones. Ensure your talents are suited for the task and keep the emotions parameter injecting dosages of interest, optimism, joy, trust and admiration to continue to transform self-doubt into self-esteem. If on the other hand the handler detects or senses an external disturbance contributing to differences between our behavioral output and the desired standard we originally installed onto our consciousness, the POS operates on the difference and provides adjustment to correct the error. The POS switches to a closed-loop configuration as it needs to take the reference from the surrounding environment effectors into account to maintain the contextual behavioral output at the specified levels. This feedback loop will provide information to the POS on system performance characteristics such as stability, sensitivity, and overall impedance reflected by external disturbance or noise we are experiencing. The handler turns to our social cognition parameter to help absorb the incoming information about the social world, issues, other people or groups. The POS adjusts the social cognition parameter, directing it to assess the disturbance that's inducing the error in our output response, making us more reactive than we desire, in efforts to determine possible corrective action via our subsequent judgments, actions and decisions. The social cognition parameter shall bounce the incoming information against our memory banks and the rest of the POS factors set points, in efforts to interpret it relative to our beliefs, general impressions or expectations of how this other person or group that has approached us ought to behave. The social cognition factor must first assimilate the information even if inconsistent with the form and contour stored in our memory. The rest of the POS factors will then assist in efforts to restore their set point to the normal state condition. These factors shall collectively tailor the incongruent incoming information to match the standard by shaping it during the interpretation stage, so that it is seen consistent with our revised standard moral code. The POS simply revises or further develops the feedback information to reduce the error and match the standard. So, with a predetermined factor setup recipe, we can keep the psyche in equilibrium and work as the catalyst that keeps us in a state of flow. With the POS well tuned, there are infinite possibilities at our disposal, enabling us to attract whatever we desire in the universe through creatively matching our beliefs, intentions and desires to the various elemental aspects of our lives as these naturally flow towards us. Following nature's threads as these are presented seems to provide a much more efficient way to co-create with it than trying to forecast our future via a plan to achieve an expectancy, in a world that depicts a significant degree of randomness and surprise. Your consciousness listening systems must be continuously aware of the opportunities and events your surrounding field presents for you to harness, and in doing so, allowing you to impose an effect on the evolving future. Your psyche shall interpret and accommodate suitable incoming stimuli as each information stream encodes valuable cosmic purpose. Our schedule must include cool-down periods during the day, in efforts to reconsider our options. The idea is to capture these streams or threads as they come in and capture them in a master task list. Don't think about them initially, just list them as they are perceived. Nature's urge for symmetry and perfection is encoded in these random during planning activities. Our job as nature's co-creator is to discern and weave these together, guided by the revised value code and the sequence, priority and order our needs call for. There might be areas of your life you feel are more of a priority, and you may want to focus or emphasize on accessing themes or threads that highlight these, whether it be family, growth, health or any other. After envisioning these preferences collectively, the idea is to integrate them to formulate an overall vision or target, in preparation for an action plan and distilled manageable tasks to accomplish it. With these considerations in mind, we can compile the most suitable set of goals. Our running to-do list needs not only to capture all incoming threads, hints, short-term steps and SMART goals, but also the big dreams that may seem impossible to accomplish. The needs, beliefs and values we inventoried previously will most probably overlap, so we can think of these collectively to define our areas of priority. With the areas of our life now prioritized, we want to draft a set of goals that allow us to maximize fulfillment for each. Correlate these goals with a list of resources we inventoried back in the current state section and be realistic while conducting the exercise. Recall that we would need to rely on these very same available resources to fabricate our future life and achieve our objectives as well as nature's. Then, Our blueprint is simply determined by writing a statement that depicts our greatest personal aspirations and pairing it with a set of SMART goals in the interest of humanity's well-being. Once the goals are finally broken down into procedural steps that encode our revised moral code, this task list is now palpable and at a level where pertinent work can be assigned a slot of time and energy to act upon it. A key facet of the POS is to incorporate the actions you'll be taking into the calendar according to their level of difficulty while factoring in potential intellectual demands. We must keep in mind our daily energy profile and have good understanding of our natural energy peaks and valleys as we progress through the day, and along with it, we must also observe related stress rate signatures. Harmonizing the task demands with the energy stress level profile allows us to reduce the number of decisions we make daily. By doing this, we rely on more primitive parts of the brain which are conducive of being an autopilot. By getting into the habit of using these procedural memories, we reduce the decision-making process time allocated to the low-importance tasks, allowing us to devote this energy to the frontal lobe and residing executive functions, and consequently, using it to make the real changes we are interested in accomplishing. A hard copy calendar allows for portability, easy access, confidentiality, and continuous visual aid to anticipate and select the subsequent task to be executed. Once completely clear on the discrete steps of the trajectory, physically act on the steps within 5 seconds to overcome inertia and avoid procrastination. Given that your schedule is aligned with the adequate energy levels, the POS will almost automatically trigger into action. We must continuously monitor the performance and efficiency of the advancement, ensuring these are best possible every inch of the way. Stick to the sequence and try not to deviate from the flight plan. If you've done the right setup, the POS should flow like a piping network, carrying the information, energy, and actions to the point of use just in time. As new incoming orders, competing tasks, priorities, or commands are registered, the POS may interrupt the task at hand and temporarily place it on hold to reassess priorities. This being the case, we must ensure that subsequent actions and related preparations remain available in queue for the next available time slot. The key is to use every bit of available time adding value to the connecting goal, reducing cost while providing the best possible contextual response. From this point on, the gain and advantage will reside in the pattern used to alternate and jump to actions needed to advance the completion of competing tasks moving in parallel. Moving across tasks furnishes creativity and different points of view. Completing a step within a parallel ongoing task may further habilitate the task previously placed on hold. Your flexibility increases and your creativity sparks, providing magical abilities to innovate and resolve problems. We must also continuously monitor ourselves to prevent and control potential problems. It is imperative that we monitor the contextual provenance of our responses, while executing the high-priority tasks we categorized earlier, ensuring the POS is responding in a capable and stable manner while contributing a dose of the revised standard to our external surroundings. This monitoring module of the POS will let us predict for planning purposes via identifying which factors are not properly actuating and responses that are deviating from contextual target, allowing us to determine approximate marginal actions by feeding this information back into the system. We must gauge our responses relative to the revised moral standard continuously to keep ourselves capable, stable, efficient, and productive human beings. And this is ultimately determined by our choices, by how we chose to project our personality, by how we frame our decision-making process to fabricate contextual responses, by how we prioritize our goals, by how we channel our emotions and index our actions relative to our energy level, by acting with timing, by understanding the forces acting against us and mitigating the risks, and by perfecting the ability of applying the various switching rules the Lean Me POS offers as destiny evolves and the very essence of who we are is burned on the time continuum. In conclusion, we've modeled the basic architecture of the psyche based on the flow of a typical factory. An invisible production line whose raw materials are the input stimuli we receive from our own unconscious drives as well as from the environment. A soft domains machine depicting configurable set points that fabricates contextual responses and materializes dreams in the interest of a better world. A software intended to bring our minds into equilibrium, so that as individuals we initiate the much-needed social reform. Henry Ford once said that if everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself, and I truly believe the expression reflects tangible reality. What's required of every organism for the world to mend, is for it to transfer out of the self-image predicament it's in, operate from a restored self-esteem state, and furnish a collaborative environment that's transparent and honest. As proposed, It is far easier to begin the movement from within ourselves at the individual level. Moving from the narcissistic self-hatred image we see surfacing everywhere to a respectful relationship with ourselves is at the heart of the proposal. You see, there is instability as soon as we group a few of us together, and others may not always be there for us when needed, but a strong self-esteem tends to steadiness. The Lean Me POS suggests that the transformation within us is contagious and over time will ramify and permeate all upstream subsystems. It does this by depicting the inner workings of our psyche and by showing how related parameters can be adjusted to fulfill nature's requirements, letting us know that we are appropriate for the job. It is this self-awareness, developed integrity and purposeful forward movement that allows us to organically move into the unconditionally accepted love and self-esteem condition. My hope is that at least my immediate circle of influence glances at these humble words and that this sparks a movement that infiltrates all members of current generations, in efforts to shift society's trajectory. If at the very least you consider the proposal, upload a copy of the revised moral code onto consciousness, begin to adjust your psyche parameters according to the provided recipes, and let us embark in this journey to make it a better world, paving the way for those that will succeed us.